Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The sun was just rising over the Bighorn Mountains when Rachel Whitlow heard the hoofbeats fast, steady, coming straight for her homestead. She tightened her grip on the rifle and moved to the porch, barefoot on the weathered planks, heart loud in her chest. She had not seen another soul in 5 days. Not since the storm knocked the bridge out and left her and her 2 boys alone with dwindling supplies and a broken axle on the wagon. And then she saw him, Zeke Darnell. He reined in his horse at the edge of her yard, dust clouding behind him. He looked the same and not the same, older, broader through the shoulders, sunburned, with more lines around his eyes. But it was him. The same man who had left Dry Creek 5 years ago after her husband died. The same one who used to fix fences for her in exchange for supper. The same one who had looked at her like she was more than just a widow trying to hold it all together. Rachel lowered the rifle but did not step forward. "Why are you here?" Her voice cracked. Not from fear but something else she could not name yet. Zeke swung down from the saddle, boots landing hard in the dirt. "Because I could not leave without you." She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed again. He took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I heard about the bridge washout. Folks in town said you might be stuck out here. I came to see if you were all right. And you rode all this way just for that?" she asked. "No," he said. "I rode all this way because I could not stop thinking about you." Behind her, the screen door creaked open. "Ma?" Her oldest, Bo, stepped outside, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was 10, tall for his age, with his father's jaw and her stubbornness. "Is everything okay?" Rachel glanced back, then nodded. "Go get your brother dressed. We've got company." Zeke waited until Bo had disappeared inside before speaking again. "You look tired, and thinner than you should be." "We're all right," she said quickly. "Just low on flour and down a wagon." He looked past her to the barn. "I can fix that axle." She hesitated. "You did not have to come, Zeke." "I know." She finally stepped off the porch. "You really came all this way, just to help." He nodded once. "And to see you." They stood there in the quiet morning, the only sound the wind brushing through dry grass. Rachel's heart beat so hard she thought he might hear it. Then she said, "All right, but if you are staying, you are eating too." He smiled, slow and warm. "I would like that." By mid-morning, Zeke had the wagon jacked up and the axle halfway fixed. Rachel brought him a plate of cornbread and beans, her hands shaking just a little when she handed it over. He sat in the shade of the barn and looked up at her. "You always were good at feeding a man," he said. She gave him a sideways look. "You always were good at showing up when things got hard." "Maybe I should have stayed the first time." She paused, her breath catching. "Why didn't you?" "I thought you needed space. Time to grieve." "I needed help," she said softly. "And maybe someone to just sit with me." Zeke looked down at the plate, then back at her. "I can sit now." Rachel did not answer. She turned and walked back to the house, but her hands were still shaking. That evening, with the wagon repaired and the boys asleep, Rachel sat on the porch. Zeke joined her, a blanket tossed over one shoulder, the moonlight catching the curve of his jaw. "I missed this," he said. "The quiet. The way you always leave space for the night." She looked out toward the mountains. "It is easier than talking sometimes." "I can talk if that helps." She smiled faintly. "You already did more than enough today." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Rachel, do you remember the day I left?" "Of course I do," she said. "You said you had work in Montana. Said it was time." "I lied," he said. "I left because I was scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I had no right to ask for." Rachel turned toward him. "And now?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "Now I am not scared anymore." She swallowed hard. And what is it you want? You, he said. If you want me too. Silence stretched between them, thick with years and mischances. Finally, she whispered, It has been a long time, Zeke. I know. And I have 2 boys who barely remember their father. I know that too. And I do not have much. He reached over, took her hand gently. You have everything I ever wanted. Rachel's breath hitched, but she did not pull away. The moonlight made his eyes look softer, like the boy he used to be. I am not the same, she said. Neither am I, he replied. But I still see you. Her hand tightened in his. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to safe. Zeke stayed that night in the barn. He made sure the doors were locked, checked the roof for leaks, and left his bedroll by the hay. Rachel watched him through the window when he thought no one was looking. And when she finally went to bed, she whispered to the empty room, Maybe this time we both stay. The next morning broke with a soft drizzle. Thin gray clouds stretched low across the sky. Rachel stood at the stove, turning cornmeal cakes in the pan, listening to the sound of Zeke splitting kindling outside. She didn't look up when Bo shuffled in and took a seat at the table, but she could feel him watching her with the same quiet curiosity she'd seen in his father's eyes years ago. Bo picked at a splinter on the edge of the table. He gonna stay long? Rachel set a tin plate in front of him. Long enough to help us get things back in order. He chewed in silence for a while. He's strong. He's always been. Bo nodded, then looked out the window. He talked like Pa used to. Slow. Careful. Rachel didn't answer, just handed him a cup of milk and went back to the stove. The baby, Eli, was still sleeping in the back room, and the hush of the house felt too delicate to break with more words. By noon, the rain had passed, leaving behind soft mud and the scent of wet sage. Zeke hauled the last of the firewood onto the porch and wiped his hands on his trousers. I'll patch the chicken wire next, he said, not looking at her, just watching the horizon like he was measuring how much daylight he had left. Rachel stood beside a bucket of laundry, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. There's a stretch of fence down north of the creek. Storm took it. That's where I'll head after, he said. She didn't say thank you, he already knew. Instead, she wrung out a shirt and hung it on the line. The breeze tugged it sideways, and Zeke reached out to pin the edge down with one hand, his knuckles brushing hers. You still wear the same soap, he said. She paused, cloth heavy in her grip. It's the only kind I know how to make. He didn't smile, but something in his face eased. I remember. Late afternoon brought a wagon from town. Old Mr. Holcomb, drawn by his mule and trailing the smell of tobacco, stopped by with a sack of flour and a sack of oats. He handed them over with a grunt, eyeing Zeke with a squint. You're back, Holcomb said. Seems that way, Zeke replied. Holcomb grunted again, then turned to Rachel. Storm's got half the valley asking for extra hands. You'd be wise to keep him around, if he's offering. Rachel took the sacks. We're managing. Managing's different from living, Holcomb said, especially with young uns. Then he climbed back onto his bench and flicked the reins. Glad to see some things ain't broke yet. Zeke watched him go. He always talk like that? Rachel dusted her hands on her apron. Only when he means something. They didn't speak again until supper. The boys had fallen asleep early, worn out from helping haul water and gather eggs. Zeke sat across from her at the table, his hands clean, his shirt damp at the collar. I saw your name carved on the barn beam, he said, breaking a piece of biscuit. You wrote it beside his. I was angry that day, she said. Didn't know where else to put it. I never asked you to wait. You didn't have to. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. I didn't know how to be something solid then. I was still trying to outrun my father's fists. The idea of standing still, of building something, scared me worse than war ever did. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. And now, I've been still a long time, he said. The fear's gone. What's left is wanting. The lamp between them flickered low. She reached over and turned the wick down, letting the shadows stretch along the walls. I kept your tools in the same place, she said. Zeke's voice was low. I noticed. She stood, moved toward the door. If you're too sore to ride tomorrow, there's a pile of shingles needs laying. I'm not sore, he said. And I don't plan on going anywhere. She paused with her hand on the latch, not turning yet. I'm not the same woman who watched you ride off. I know, he said, and I still want you. Rachel opened the door, letting the night air in. Then I guess we'll see what comes of it. He watched her step out, the porch creaking under her weight. She didn't look back, but she didn't close the door either. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the sky stretched wide and dark, and Zeke stayed at the table a while longer, listening to the wind settle in the cottonwoods. The morning after the rain, the sun came through soft and gold, slanting in over the hills with the hush of something beginning. Rachel was in the garden with her sleeves rolled high and skirt damp at the hem, pulling weeds from around the squash. The earth was loamy under her nails, and the warmth on her back made her pause a while, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of sage and damp leaves. Your rows are clean, Zeke said from behind her. Straight as a rifle barrel. She didn't turn. I was raised by a woman who believed crooked planting brought crooked luck. He crouched beside her, reaching for the wild grass winding around the beans. My mother never planted a thing. Said the ground didn't want her hands. Rachel glanced at him. That why you learned to work wood instead? No. That came after I broke my arm falling from a mule. Couldn't lift a shovel, so my uncle handed me a plane and a hunk of pine. Said I was better off shaping what already grew than trying to grow it myself. She looked at the roughness of his knuckles. You shape things quiet. Like you're listening. I am, he said, to the way they want to hold together. She stood and brushed off her skirt. There's a cracked joist in the loft above the boys' room. Been meaning to brace it before winter comes. I'll see to it this afternoon. Rachel studied him a moment, then turned toward the house. Inside, Eli was sitting on the floor with a tin cup and a bent spoon, tapping out a rhythm only he understood. Bo was near the hearth, carving notches into a piece of driftwood. Rachel stepped around them, pulled a clean dress from the hook, and called over her shoulder, I'm heading to the creek. We're near out of washing water. Bo didn't look up. Want me to come? She shook her head. Stay with your brother. Zeke's in the garden. If you need something, ask. She left with a bucket in each hand, skirt tucked up for the walk. The creek was a quarter-mile through grass that hadn't seen a fence in a generation. The air was thick with the hum of bees and the sweet smoke of cottonwood bark drying in the sun. When she reached the bend where the water slowed and pooled wide enough for wading, she dipped the buckets and sat on the bank to rest. Her boots were wet through, and she pulled them off, letting her toes sink into the mud. She heard him before she saw him, the even tread of boots, the soft jingle of a spur left unbuckled. Didn't mean to follow, Zeke said, stopping a few paces back. Just figured you might want help carrying. Rachel didn't move. You always walk that quiet? Only when I'm not sure if I'm welcome. She rubbed her hands together. You've been fixing things since you got here, but I haven't heard you ask for anything. I didn't come to take. Then what did you come for? He stepped down the bank, boots sinking slow into the soft edge. When I left, I thought I was sparing you. Thought I'd only ever be a reminder of what you'd lost. You were, she said, but you were also the first thing that made me feel like I hadn't lost everything. Zeke sat beside her, not touching. I spent years in places that never asked me to stay. Mining camps, trail towns. Left the day the food got bad or the fights got worse. But I woke up yesterday in your barn and didn't want to go. Rachel turned her face toward the water. I don't know what to do with wanting. You don't have to do anything. He looked at her steady. But I have to say it. She looked down at her hands. Say what? That I'm here, he said. Not for a fence or a roof or a meal. I'm here because I see a life with you. And I can't pretend I don't. The wind stirred the reeds along the bank. A crow called out from the trees, sharp and brief. Rachel stood and picked up one of the buckets. Then carry this one back. Zeke rose without a word, took the second. They walked side by side through the grass, the silence between them no longer hollow, but full. When they reached the house, Rachel paused at the porch step. There's a trunk in the attic with some of my husband's things. I thought I'd burn it last spring, but I couldn't. Zeke's voice was low. You don't have to. I think I will now, she said. It's time. He nodded once, then turned toward the lean-to to split more wood. That night, Rachel didn't light a fire. She stood at the edge of the yard, watching the stars come out one by one. Zeke joined her with a blanket slung over his shoulder and didn't speak. She leaned into him, her head against his arm. I don't know how to begin again, she said. We don't have to begin, Zeke answered. We just keep walking. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of pine pitch and dust. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe the road ahead wasn't something to survive but something to build. The frost came earlier than expected that year. Not heavy yet, but enough to rim the fence posts with silver and make the chickens slow to stir. Rachel woke before dawn, as she always did, and found her breath visible in the bedroom air. She dressed quickly, wrapping her shawl tight, and stepped out to check the root cellar. The latch was stiff from the cold. Zeke was already in the yard, chopping at a tangle of dead willow limbs with a hatchet. He turned when he heard the creak of the cellar door and raised a hand in quiet greeting. She nodded and disappeared into the dark below. Later, after the boys finished their chores and went to visit the Miller girls down the ridge with a basket of eggs, Rachel set a kettle on the stove and poured water over dried mint. Zeke came in just as the tea began to steep and stood by the door, rubbing his palms together for warmth. I saw smoke near the canyon trail, he said. Campfire, maybe. Could be someone passing through. She turned from the stove. You think they'll come this far? Hard to say. Might be a trapper. Might be someone without a claim, looking to take one. Rachel poured 2 tin cups and set one on the table. We've had no trouble in years. That doesn't mean it won't come, he said, sitting across from her. She watched him sip. You still carry that Colt? He nodded. Always. Then I'll sleep easy. He stretched his fingers around the warm metal of the cup. You ever think about leaving? She frowned. This place. He tipped his head. You've held onto it a long time. Held it together. I don't know where else I would go. There's a town west of here, smaller than Dry Creek. I passed through last year. They've got a school, a store, a proper midwife. I've never seen the ocean, she said suddenly. Zeke blinked, surprised. No, never seen anything bigger than the bighorns. She looked down into her tea. Sometimes I wonder if staying was about safety or just fear. You ever want to go? I'd ride with you, he said. She raised her eyes. You'd leave the plains? I'd leave anything, if it meant waking up beside you. She stood, slow and quiet, and moved to the window. The sky was pale and cloudless, the wind lifting fine dust from the road. She spoke without turning. I've never had someone offer me something without expecting something back. I'm not asking anything, he said, Just telling you what's true. She leaned her forehead against the cold glass. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, I wouldn't miss anything. And I miss being seen. Zeke rose, crossing the room with steady steps. He didn't touch her, just stood behind her where she could feel the heat of him. You're not invisible to me, he said. She exhaled, her breath fogging the window pane. After a long moment, she turned. We'd have to sell the land. Or lease it. There are buyers, he said. People looking for pasture, even if it needs mending. Eli's still small. He doesn't know anything but this house. He'll learn to know other things, Zeke said. Things with you in them. Rachel looked up at him. I don't want to forget this place. You don't have to, he said. But you don't have to stay buried in it either. She stepped closer. If we left, we'd be starting from nothing. We'd be starting from us. That night, she packed a box with the boys' winter shirts and the dried apples she'd stored in muslin pouches. She wrapped her mother's spoon in cloth and slid it between two bundles of socks. Zeke carried the crate to the wagon without comment. His hands sure, his jaw set. They didn't speak of where they were going yet, only that they were going. The road hadn't been cleared in years, but Zeke hitched the team and walked the length of the trail to check for washouts. Rachel swept the hearth and tied shut the pantry doors. She stood on the porch when the sun went down, the boys asleep inside, and watched Zeke make one last loop around the barn with a lantern. When he came back, she was still there. I was wrong, she said. It's not that I don't know how to begin again. Zeke waited. I just didn't have anyone to begin with. He took her hand, rough against rough. You do now. They stood in silence as the stars came out, one by one, each bright as memory. Neither let go. The wagon creaked under the weight of their few possessions as Rachel tied down the last bundle of blankets. The sun sat low, warm against the flanks of the horses, and the dust in the yard had begun to settle after days of motion. Bo stood near the corral, rubbing his palm over the fence rail, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Rachel watched him a moment before walking over, her boots leaving dry prints in the soil. You worried about going? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, I don't know what it's like anywhere else. Neither do I, she said. But I figure it's time we find out. Bo picked up a stick and traced a line in the dirt. Will I still have chores? She smiled. You'll have more than you want. Zeke passed behind them, leading the team toward the creek one last time. The buckets swung gently from the yoke. Rachel looked after him, then turned to Bo and said, He'll expect you to help, but he won't expect you to be someone you're not. The boy nodded, then looked up. He's different than Pa. Rachel's voice softened. Yes, he is. Bo ran the stick along the fence once more. That might be all right. They left at dawn 2 days later, the house behind them shuttered and still. Rachel had written a letter and left it on the table, sealed with wax and a simple note for the next owner. May this land be kind to you. May you be kind in return. The trail west was long, the ruts deep from older wagons, the air thinner by degrees. They followed the river for 3 days, then crossed a ridge where the wind never stopped moving. Zeke drove steady, never rushing the mules. At night, they made camp near water, Rachel cooking over coals while the boys gathered brush. Zeke always checked the perimeter, rifle across his knees when he sat down afterward. One evening, after the boys had curled into their bedrolls, Rachel knelt near the fire, twisting the hem of her sleeve between her fingers. She didn't speak until Zeke had settled beside her, close enough to feel the heat off his arm. I used to think I'd die on that land, she said. Not because I wanted to, but because it felt like all I could do. He didn't look at her. You stayed because you're strong. I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. She looked up then. But I'm glad I didn't go alone. Zeke reached over and touched the place just above her wrist, where the skin was bare. Neither did I. They traveled for 16 days. The boys grew darker under the sun, their shoulders stronger from lifting, their eyes more curious with each town they passed. On the 17th morning, they reached a small rise that overlooked a wide plain where the soil was dark and soft and the trees grew straight, not bent from wind. Zeke pulled the team to a stop, and Rachel stepped down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the loam. A farmhouse stood in the distance, paint peeling but the roof intact. A barn angled behind it, and a creek ran along the bottom of the slope, lined with cottonwoods. "There's work here," Zeke said. A man named Calhoun said he'd let us lease the back pasture in exchange for fence work and a cut of the hay. Rachel looked out over the land. "It's quiet." He nodded. "Not much passes through, just sky and time." Bo climbed down and hoisted Eli onto his hip. Rachel walked forward a few paces, her skirt brushing the tall grass, and turned slowly, taking in the full stretch of what lay ahead. When she looked back at Zeke, she said, "This'll do." They settled into the small house behind the barn while Zeke worked the pasture. Rachel cleaned the hearth and scrubbed the floors until her knuckles stung, her movements fast and sure, like she was clearing away more than just dust. She planted a new garden with the seeds she'd tucked into a flour sack before they left the old place. Bo helped build the chicken coop. Eli took to throwing stones into the creek and laughing when they splashed. On the first Sunday after they arrived, Rachel stood in the doorway of their new home, apron tied tight, hair braided close. Zeke came in from the barn, his shirt damp with sweat and his hands streaked with cedar dust. He paused when he saw her, and something passed between them, quiet, certain. "I'd marry you if you asked," she said, voice steady. Zeke stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Then I'm asking." She reached for his hand. "I'll say yes." They were married beneath the cottonwoods by a circuit preacher who passed through once a month. Bo stood beside Zeke, straight-backed and solemn. Eli sat on Rachel's hip, tugging at the ribbon in her hair. After the vows, they shared a meal with their neighbor's salt pork, cornbread, and early apples. That night, Rachel and Zeke sat on the porch, the boys asleep inside, and watched the stars come out. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. "You think we'll grow old here?" "If we're lucky," Zeke said. She took his hand in hers, their fingers worn and calloused from the same kind of work, the same kind of life. "Then let's be lucky." They didn't need more than that. The land was enough, each other more than enough. Years passed. The garden grew straight and full. The roof held through every storm. Bo stayed on and built a house of his own near the ridge. Eli left for school in Cheyenne and came back with a quiet girl who laughed like spring rain. Rachel's hair turned silver. Zeke's hands stiffened with time. But every morning, he still rose before the sun and kissed her temple before stepping out into the light. They grew slow, grew steady, and grew together. And when the days got shorter and the air turned sharp, Rachel would sit with Zeke by the fire, her knitting in her lap, and look over at him with the same eyes she used the day she first let him stay. "I never thought I'd have peace," she once said. "You didn't find it," he told her. "You made it," and she believed him, every day for the rest of her life.